So I ran into a problem on my 2007 Victory Vegas 8-ball where it would start idle, kind of stumble, idle real low, and anytime you tried to accelerate it would just die. Didn't matter where the lever on the left hand side was. So I traced it back to a fueling issue. I got a fuel pressure tester gauge from O'Reilly Auto Parts and hooked it into the test port over here where that gray cap is. You screw it on there, and no matter how many times I turn the ignition on and off and prime the fuel pump, it would build about 8 psi of fuel pressure and drop as quickly as it built it, which is not nearly enough for the motorcycle to run properly. I want to say it's somewhere in the high 40s, low 50s psi. So I did some research and found out that the fuel pump that's in the tank is pretty notorious for failing, especially when the motorcycle sits for a while without being driven. So I took that fuel pump assembly out of the tank. Forgive me, I've already torn it all apart, but this is the main part. The regulator goes in here. If you take these two screws out, the fuel pump goes in there, and it had a metal band around it that I cut off. I'll just use a good quality hose clamp, hook that back on there. And then there was this metal piece retainer also holding that fuel pump on. And here's the pressure regulator that I pulled out of there. Looks pretty gross, corroded. And here's the fuel pump that I pulled out of there. Pretty gross and corroded as well. Now I believe that this fuel pump was probably fine. It wasn't making any weird noises. It was pumping fuel. I want to say that the pressure regulator may have been diverting the pressure back into the tank. I don't know. But you also have to take this hose assembly off the end of the pump. There was a metal band on here that I cut off carefully to not mess up the pipe. And there was filter socks on the end of here as well. There was no clamp. I did use my heat gun and I heat up this plastic so it was a little more pliable, and I was able to pull those filter socks off of there. I will probably do the same, heat it up, maybe put a hose clamp on there first, put the filter sock back on. They were kind of at an angle. I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute when I start putting it back together. But hopefully it takes care of it. The fuel pressure regulator was about $40 on Amazon, and I got the new pump and the filter socks in here. So I'm going to start putting it back together, and I'll continue on. Alright, so here's the finished product. Got the new filter socks on there. They did press in pretty good, but I put a hose clamp on each side just to make sure it was sealed up good. Another thing is on the O-rings on the fuel pressure regulator, put just a little bit of oil on them. It helps it go back into the housing a little easier. I had to buy a new piece of pipe to go between the fuel filter and the housing here. The piece of pipe that was in there was pretty gross. Really didn't have any type of seal to it. Almost feels more like PVC at this point. Kind of cracked up. So I went to local auto parts store, O'Reilly's, got some of this fuel line. Matches up perfect. Cut a small little piece, probably about a 1/2 inch long. Put a little bit of oil around the outside, pushed it in there, and I couldn't get it to go in there all the way. So I found a socket that I had just a random axle nut socket, something that would go up against the metal housing here. And this was before I put the hose on here. And I was able to push it in there. And then I had a friend tighten down this at the same time so it stayed in there, otherwise it would push back out about 1/8 of an inch. But gonna get it back in the tank here and fire it up. Hopefully this helps someone out. Polaris wanted $600 for one of these fuel pumps, so I got the regulator and the fuel pump, and the fuel pump came with the new socks. So I'm about $145 in with those parts, so that's a pretty big savings.